Hello everyone, welcome back to Dark Knight Tales. Before we dive in, please show your support, give this video a like and be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. So let's get started. The first story. Something followed me from a psychiatric hospital. I've been back and forth on whether or not to tell this story. Mostly because it involves some aspects of my working life that I am not at liberty to discuss, but also because it had severe personal implications for me. Anyway, I have decided to share it here. And I hope you understand why there are things I simply can't go into detail about. This all started in December 2020. As part of my education, I was scheduled for a 6-month internship at a psychiatric hospital. I had previous experience with working with this type of patients, so I was really excited about it. I switched around the 4 different wards in the hospital, so I treated a lot of different people with lots of different problems. I was curious about all the different aspects, so I never said no to a task, which meant I came across everything from murderers and pedophiles, to suicidal teenagers with personality disorders. In my work life, I've had people spit at me, verbally and physically assault me, throw SHD at me and all that stuff. So I like to think I'm a pretty though guy. And besides that, I always carried a personal assault alarm. One press of a button and staff from every ward would be there in a matter of seconds. On one of the wards I quickly noticed that there was a certain room, which was monitored 24/7 by a guard. To be clear, this is a pretty normal procedure, either because the patient is physically abusive, suicidal or restrained. But most patients get the watch pulled off them relatively quickly. I asked a colleague, and she told me it was a female patient, let's just call her Anne, who was extremely aggressive and psychotic beyond belief. At that point Anne had been restrained to her bed for 3 months. I could not believe what I was hearing. We have really strict procedures when it comes to restraining people with belts. BTW, they re-soft belts made of fabric, not leather. So, restraining the patient really is the absolutely last resort we go to. I asked the chief psychiatrist what was up with this girl and he just scoffed and said if only I knew, but honestly she defies logic. He told me that at first they thought she was psychotic, but her symptoms only got worse, no matter how much different medication they tried. Then they thought she might have suffered a trauma, and was in a dissociative state. But that still didn't fit the profile of her symptoms. She had gone from being a perfectly normal woman, in her 20s, to being violent, extremely aggressive and unable to speak, in just 4 months. That is practically unheard of, especially as no drugs was involved. We regularly make a toxicology check of all patients and always when they're admitted. One day my alarm went off. They're all connected so I know where I need to run to help my colleagues. I immediately knew it had to be Anne. And I was right, she had only had her legs and torso fixated, again normal procedure, if the patient otherwise is relatively calm. She had defecated in her hand, and thrown it at the guard watching her. She then proceeded to bite her fingers so hard that 3 or 4, I can't remember the exact number, had really bad fractures. Both her hands were a bloody mess, and she needed like 50 stitches afterwards. I wasn't the blood or the fact that she would throw her own filth at us, I had seen that loads of times, but the screams this woman made. It was the most primal, guttural and terrifying sounds I have ever heard. It scared me. The best way I can describe it's something like a bear growling and a mountain lion hissing and spitting at the same time. I have seen my fair share of people in primal distress, but I could have never imagined that a person could make sounds like that. As an intern, I am in no way allowed to use force, so I was just watching as 7 of my colleagues tried to fixate her fully to her bed. They had serious trouble pinning her down. Remind you, these are really experienced people. At last we called a medicinal alarm, which immediately calls for a chief psychiatrist to make decisions. He decided to forcefully medicate her. They gave her one and then a second shot. It only seemed to piss her off, even though it should have put a bear to sleep. At the 3rd injection she calmed enough so that they could restrain her. She never nodded off, she just breathed heavily and kept staring up at the same corner of the room. Sometimes smirking at something only she could see. Fast forward 2 weeks. I was back at the ward. It was a relatively calm weekend, so there really wasn't much to do. Anne was in one of her good periods, so she had had her restraints removed. A guard was always by her though. I was sitting in the office, when suddenly I see Ann walking in the hallway without the guard. I don't know if he had taken a bathroom break or whatever, but he wasn't around. So I catched up with her. I asked her what she was doing in the hallway alone. But of course she didn't respond. I should mention that many of my colleagues were afraid of Ann, and rightfully so. Even though everyone is aware that it's the illness and not the person attacking you, but when it keeps happening that patient does catch some stigma. I for one always try to look at the person and not the illness, so I asked where we were going. She took me by the arm and led me to the common area. She went over to a book cabinet, turned and looked at me, and muttered, "Read. Book." I was completely taken aback by the fact that she was speaking. She pulled out a random book and handed it to me. She then sat down on the floor and started rocking back and forth. I joined her on the floor, and started reading the book. It was just some random old book, probably from a charity, and it had no special meaning. But as I read, she came closer and closer to me. She then cuddled up to me, put her head on my lap and fell asleep. One of my colleagues came by and she looked absolutely shocked. And before I knew it, 5 or 6 people including the chief psychiatrist was looking at me reading this random book out to her. I caught a lot of praise for this, which is always nice. But then, things took a turn for the worse, for me at least. It started one night when I was home alone. It was a completely normal night for me, until I heard something from upstairs coming down the stairs. The best way to describe it is like a big dog thrashing and tumbling down the stairs. You know, like when a dog rushes down the stairs to greet you? But this was bigger, much bigger. I could hear the weight of something tumbling down, while nails or claws or whatever slid on the steps. I got up, thinking that somehow there was a massive animal in my house. But there was nothing there. That scared the ever-living SHT out of me. I had never had anything like that happen to me. I left the house and stayed the night with my parents. But I also had strange effects on my body. Like I had a filter over my eyes or something. Everything started to seem out of focus, like tunnel vision but with a massive blur added to it. And then I started to dissociate. I had this feeling of being totally out of contact with my body. Then came the panic attacks. My GF called an ambulance one of the times, because I was on the verge of a heart attack. The paramedics said I had a heart rate of 240 BPM. I have had no prior problems with my psyche, but I figured it was stress. I have suffered from sleep paralysis before, but never with hallucinations or whatever you want to call it. But that started recently. I see a large black mass, with long arms and legs sit in the top corner of our bedroom. Like a massive spider, but just with 4 legs. This is now happening on a nightly basis. A couple of days ago I told my girlfriend about it, because she kept pestering me with questions about my nightmares. She said, "That's funny. Every time you're just about to go to sleep, you look up in that corner and you sort of smirk." That reminded me of Ann. And now I am absolutely terrified that I might have brought something home. Believe or not, that's up to you. I have never treated a patient like Ann, and none of my colleagues had either. It was scary stuff. And I have never suffered any psychological problems before, never. But something is going on, I am sure of it. It feels like it wants to get back at me or something. And by the way, Ann is much better today. She is in a rehabilitating home, where she thrives. One day she might even be able to have her normal life back. The second story. Creepy men in a van tried to take me on a trip. Back in the early 2000s I was a young, attractive college girl, and I worked at a tiny coffee shop across the street from the school I was attending. It was very small and never busy, so almost all of my shifts were solo. It was a drive-through only store with an employee entrance and drive-up window at the front of the building. The bathroom was on the right side of the building and also had an exit door. It was located across campus from my apartment. I had walked to work as I often did because it was only about 5 minutes away in nice weather. I had been there for a while, bored as usual doing my homework, when a brown van pulled directly up to the window. This was odd because you're supposed to order at the speaker near the large menu display like most drive-through experiences. It was also odd because the van was so creepy, like a literal rape van joke on wheels. It had blacked out windows in the back and had seen better days. 2 men stared at me from the van. The driver was an elderly man with long white hair and cold, blue eyes. The passenger was a scruffy middle-aged man in an old baseball hat. I opened the window and asked if I could help them. I could smell liquor radiating from the open window of the van. The driver called me Linda and said he was so happy that I was coming with them on their trip. I immediately started to feel bad vibes and told him he was mistaken. He kept insisting that I was Linda and coming with him on a trip. I had never seen these men before, and I suddenly realized just how alone I was. I told him that I was able to assist them with a drink order, but that I'm not Linda and I'm not going anywhere. They finally left after a few minutes and never ordered anything. I took note of the license plate and was relieved to find that it was an easy one to remember, Judysvin. I locked both doors in the drive-through window after they left. I was creeped out the rest of my shift, but didn't see the van again. So I figured it was just a strange encounter with two drunk men. Fast forward to closing time. It's dark out now, so I'm finishing up my nightly duties and gathering my things to leave. I'm still slightly creeped out from the weird men in the van, so I kept my keys in my hand after I locked the coffee shop's front door from the outside. As I turned to start walking to my apartment, that same brown van pulled quickly into the parking lot right next to me. I ran back to the front door of the coffee shop. The keys trembled in my hand. I unlocked the door, scurried into the building and locked the door behind me. I ran to the bathroom and locked the door. The bathroom had an exit to the side of the building, but no windows, so I had no idea what was happening outside at this point or if the van was still out there. I called my roommate and told her what was happening. She said she and her boyfriend would come pick me up at the side exit. I waited in the bathroom listening through the door and heard footsteps outside. The door handle jiggled and I froze in fear. But suddenly it stopped jiggling and I heard nothing further at the door. My phone rang and it was my roommate. She was waiting outside the side exit. She said the van peeled out of the parking lot as she pulled up. I hopped in the back seat and we set out to follow the van as I called the police to report these dudes. They were driving erratically and at one point it became unsafe to continue following them, and we had to stop at a red light. The officer I spoke with said there was no record of registration for the license plate Judysvin. The officer said they would patrol the area, but that was really it. I never heard anything else about it from the police, and I never saw that brown van or those creepy men again. But I do still wonder how they knew when I'd be leaving and how long they'd been watching me. And who was Linda? Who's Judy? And did they take a trip with these men, but meet a different fate than I did? The third story. I am the proud owner of a haunted bed. My artist's portfolio. The furniture mom passed down to me, and the bed I had just bought that day at an auction, since I couldn't take another with me. I'm a painter by trade. I make money off of commissions and art sales. I'm a local artist in town. I took the paintings people didn't buy with me, to see if others would buy any. They were up for sale in CAFS and so on. But I had a horrifying experience around 6 nights after I moved in. I for some reason felt like I should sleep on the couch the nights after I moved in. I never knew why my instinct said not to sleep in the bed. I did hear the auctioneer say something about the bed after I bought it, but I just didn't know what. But when I finally worked up the courage to sleep that night, I was scared shitless, I assure you. I brushed my teeth, got in my pajamas, got into the bed and put on the blanket. A little while after I closed my eyes, I felt crawling on my body. I was about to open my eyes to find out, but I suddenly felt 2 hands cover my eyes, as though whatever was there didn't want me to see it or just wanted me to sleep. The crawling almost felt human. Like a child playing a prank on a grown human. I was about to fight my way off and just run, but then I felt arms grab onto me and just hold me down. I was about to scream when I heard a voice speak into my mind. It's okay, you're going to be alright. The next morning, I woke up more refreshed than I expected. I was joyous. I went to the kitchen to cook myself some breakfast when my neighbor knocked on the window. Hey, Jaska. Jaska, good morning. Are you okay? I opened the window she knocked on to answer her question. I'm okay. Have you any news for me? I always ask her that because she always keeps up with current events. Jaska, no news today. I'm not sure you're okay, you look awfully pale. Excuse me a moment, Mildred. I said that so I could look in the mirror. She was right, I did look terribly pale. My skin was whiter than it needed to be. I had that fright the night before, but I think it was more from not getting out in the sunlight much since I'd been working on a painting one of my customers commissioned me to do. The painting he wanted me to work on was a fan art of his favorite anime. Trust me, I don't paint anime fan art well. It takes a long time to get the details right. So I got dressed, worked some more on the painting, oil on canvas, and then just went for a walk in the sun. I did feel refreshed from sleeping with that weird bed, but I felt even better when I walked in the sun on such a hot day. My pale complexion was back to normal when I went back inside and looked in the mirror. Before I went home, however, a little girl ran up to me and pleaded with Bambi eyes. "Mr. Jaska, I want a painting done for me, too." I had an open slot, so I asked her, "Could you write down what you want painted?" She took out her notebook and pencil. She wrote something down, then handed me the paper. "Okay. That'll be $20. She handed me a $20 bill right on the spot. Then she ran back to her mom, I assumed that, and had such wonderful joy on her face. So, after I went back inside and checked on my complexion, I looked at what she wrote down, so I could get the details of what she wanted painted. When I looked at the girl's instructions, I nearly jumped out the window. She wanted a painting of a bed with arms crawling out of it onto a man sleeping on it. That reminded me of what I experienced the previous night. I looked at the name she wrote down, her name. Hell, 11 years old, she didn't want me to not know her when the painting was finished, I guess. That night, I decided I could use some rest since I had worked for 2 paintings now. That's my maximum for commissions. I went to the bed again. I don't know why, but I thought it'd give me a little inspiration for the little girl's painting. But when I slept in it again, I was scared to death. As soon as I closed my eyes, I heard a window break. I tried to get up, but the haunted bed's hands grabbed me and held me down. I thought for sure a burglar was in the house, but I heard footsteps come up to my studio/bedroom. I heard the same voice speak into my mind. "It's okay. That man won't hurt you, not on our watch." I wanted to talk, but there was no way I could when the haunted bed had a hand over my mouth. So I tried thinking to it instead. "How do you know I'll be safe? He's clearly in it to steal my precious art. I'll let you in on a secret, okay? We have seen that man before. He has tried kidnapping many great people. In fact, he forced them into involuntary servitude and killed them once he sees them as used. We're not going to let that happen again. Not to someone as nice as you." I heard axes going through the door. "Please, you have to let me out to call. Please, Jaska. We can't let the cops in on this. Relax." But I had a hard time relaxing. The souls in the haunted bed had me held down tight. I was shaking uncontrollably out of sheer horror. I felt something caress my face as I heard that voice speak into my mind. "You'll be okay. It'll pass. He's not going to hurt you, we promise. We'll make sure he doesn't take you, too." Whoever broke into my house broke through the door. He clearly looked like he'd seen better days. He appeared disheveled and had bruises all over his body. He stepped closer to me. I appeared asleep to him, so he stepped closer and tried to pick me up. And I wasn't moving. He tried everything: crowbar, sheer strength, but no dice. I heard him scream a little. He appeared pained. Then he ran off. I don't remember the rest of the night, but I was waking up to someone or something caressing my chest. Then that feeling stopped. I woke up in a cold sweat. I was scared shitless by the events of that night, but I was beginning to think that maybe the thing isn't evil after all. The souls in it are quite chill. If it weren't for me purchasing from that auction, I'd be dead meat. I initially thought it was all a nightmare when I started to get dressed, and froze. The door was smashed to pieces. I felt so embarrassed without a door to keep my privacy, well, private. I got up, got breakfast that day, and worked hard on both the paintings the man and the little girl commissioned for me. When I went downstairs, however, I noticed the window was smashed. I put a wood panel on the window. I will never forget the terrifying experiences I went through since I moved to this house. The fact that I couldn't move was some scary shit. Both the paintings have been finished and given to their respective customers. I'm glad to know that I have something protecting me. I've learned to live with it. Things have gotten weirder since, but I still have a hard time relaxing. What if Mildred were to find out? I'm still scared to death of sleeping upstairs, but I know in my heart that I'll be okay. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.